Hello, everyone, and welcome to this InfraNodus webinar on personal knowledge management systems. My name is Dimitri. I'm the developer of InfraNodus. We will just wait for a few seconds for people to join in. In the meanwhile, I'm going to post a poll. So you're very welcome to answer the questions, just so that we know a little bit better what systems you already use for personal knowledge management, or if you use it at all. So I don't know, for those of you who don't know what personal knowledge management systems are, it's actually a system, a framework, or a set of tools that allows you to collect, store, organize, and connect different bits and pieces of information so that you can later publish it as a research or use it in some other form to maybe implement it into a project or make some notes that you made part of your writing, or in general of whatever it is that you're thinking about. And there are many different tools. So one approach that is quite well known is Antti Evergreen Notes, which is kind of inspired by Zettelkasten approach also, where you make notes which are kind of fleeting notes. And then once you collect those notes, you start to organize them into categories, rephrase them in your own words to make them sound a bit more coherent, kind of making blocks and modules of knowledge that is relevant to your research or to whatever area you're in. And then you start making connections between them and organizing them into a narrative which you can then present to others. There are also various tools available out there, like Obsidian, which is now really trending, Rome Research, which allow you to make notes, but that kind of made a name for themselves on this feature that allows you to make connections between the notes as well. So this is pretty useful, because if you make a note about something, let's say you have a subject like fractal dynamics inside, and then a few months after you're reading something else and you make an excerpt from a book and it has the same phrase, you can mark it, and then the word fractal dynamics will connect those notes together. So this is pretty useful, because then you can start to organize your knowledge in a sort of network graph, which can then be really helpful if you want to write an article about this. You can very quickly come up with all the different notes that you made on a certain subject, see how they connect, organize them in a certain way, and so on. So right now, some people answered to the poll, and I'm going to publish the results. And the question was, which personal knowledge management systems do you know? And you could choose multiple options. So Obsidian, Rome Research are the most popular ones. Also Google Docs is pretty useful as well. Some people use some other tools. So if you don't mind, if you could write it in the chat what other tools you know and like, this would be really great. I'm going to publish the results of the poll now, so you can see what people actually answered. I like it that some people answered InfraNodus as well. This is great. And in this webinar, I'm actually going to show you how you can use InfraNodus as a personal management system, which you probably already know, but I'm just going to share my workflow. And if you also have your workflow that you would like to share, you can always publish it on our forum. I'm going to leave the link now in the chat, so you can see this. I'm going to move the Zoom panels away. Okay, so this is our portal where you can publish and share your workflows. support.noduslabs.com. Some people are answering that they're also using Notion and Airtable, I think. That's interesting. I forgot to put Notion in the poll, but obviously this is a really great tool too, and probably for some people the best, because you can already make backlinks there, which is pretty cool. They added this feature a few months ago, and also you can make really beautiful design of your notes, and there are a lot of options as well. And the brain is also a nice tool. I heard about it too. I think it was also in the poll. Was not the first option for many people, but I know that a lot of people like to use it as well. So this is great. All right. So let's move on to the next step of our session. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the Q&A section or in the Zoom chat. And I will just share the workflow that I normally use. So if you have any questions about that as well, just ask along and we will answer them as we go. All right, so I'll just show how I usually start the process. I will start with the new graph. And I'm really going to start from 0 now, so you see what I would normally do if I want to begin from a new topic. So I will even name it new topic like that. Start a new graph. I don't know if you've seen, but there are some additional features now added into the editor, which allows you to switch the mode in which you're using InfraNodus. So you have the standard editor, which will convert all the text that you're typing into the nodes on the graph. You can also use mind mapping, where the focus is made on hashtags and wiki links. You can also use wiki links only. This will only make connections between the wiki links and it will ignore the rest of the text. Then you have word cloud, Google search, and Twitter visualization, and so on. But I like to use the standard editor. I think it's pretty cool, especially if I don't yet know which concepts I want to highlight. Because the problem with writing using wiki links is that you have to know as you go along which concepts you want to choose, or you have to write the whole thing and then you make a search and then you link them together. But what I like with InfraNodus is that you can actually start typing things in and it will automatically show you actually which ideas and concepts are the most relevant in your discourse. So I'll start from a topic that is interesting for me. Actually, I have a few, so I will maybe start with one of them. And this one is going to be, let's say, physical practice. So in general, I can start with a very general thing here. Add this into the graph. Now let's see, maybe it's one of those moments when you make a demo and something stops working. No, this is all good. Okay. So as you can see, this is the main principle of InfraNodus. Every word is a node, every co-occurrence is the connection. If they belong to the same cluster, they have the same color. When the nodes become more relevant and important in the graph, they will be shown bigger. So this is how it works. Already at this point, I can start writing more about physical practice. What I can also do is that I can use the GPT-3 inside recommendation system to give me some ideas about how I could explore this discourse further. So this option is available here. And what it does is that it looks at the graph. In this case, it's a very simple graph. And then it generates some questions based on the structure of this graph. In this case, it's going to ask something which will try to expand on this discourse. So here it says, what is the effect of physical activity on the practice of yoga? What are the benefits of physical practice in relation to the development of intellectual skills? Oh, this is very interesting for me. Actually, this is what I wanted to talk about. So I will say that physical practice can be really connected to our cognitive skills and intellectual abilities. Add this into the graph. We have it visualized now, and as you can see, the structure is analyzed, and automatically InfraNodus will always recommend you to connect the things that could be connected but are not yet connected. And as it identified two different topical clusters here, one with the cognitive skills, intellectual, and another one is about physical practice, it will make you connect those different topics together. And if your discourse becomes too interconnected, it will start to motivate you to look at the periphery. So it's kind of always shifting from being focused on singularities, on multiplicities, zooming in, zooming out. This principle is actually shown on our website here in the About section. There's this map, which is inspired by Panarchy, which is actually showing how the algorithm, how the recommendation algorithm of InfraNodus really works. That you start from singularities, and at first all the content you have is not really connected. Then you start to add more ideas in, so you start developing a sort of multiplicity. You start connecting those ideas. Once you connected them together, you need to reorganize a little bit, focus on singularities again, or maybe take some of those clusters that you connected and look at them as single entities and see what other entities they could be connected to. Then you reorganize the whole thing, so you actually disrupt all the connections you have and you start to focus on multiplicity. So we could also say that this is zooming out. When we focus on multiplicities, we zoom out. When we focus on singularities, we zoom in. So here we zoom out again, look for more inspiration, maybe for more inspiration on the outside. So this is the fourth stage here. And then we go back into focusing on one aspect that we find interesting and start developing it further. So basically what I tried was to put this into practice through the algorithm, which is available here. This is how it works. Okay, so let's move on from here. We already had some ideas here about the kind of connections that we could make. So we go further and we can generate more questions with OpenAI's GPT-3. So how does physical practice, such as tossing a ball, affect cognitive abilities? So it's proposing us to go more specific into the different kinds of physical practices, or which cognitive skills are necessary in order to practice physical skills. Okay, so this could be one way that you could approach this, just answer those questions and go along. I could talk about specific physical practices. So for example, martial arts physical practice is known for its connection between the body and the mind, as it often includes some kind of ethics and spiritual practice. And as you see, at this point, I'm making so-called fleeting notes. I'm not really focusing on making well-formed English sentences. It's just jotting some ideas down to have somehow like to map out all the different possibilities that exist for me around this topic. So at this point, I don't have to focus on making them sound right. I'm just writing my own ideas in my own words, which is a great practice to have. Even if it's an excerpt from some external text or research, I'm going to try to rephrase it and write it in my own words, but not focusing so much now on making it sound good, just to actually maintain the flow. And at this point, I have these 3 sentences. I have the visualization here as a graph. So I can keep on asking GPT-3 AI to make more connections for me, or I can also go and look into the outside discourse and see what exists out there. We have a question here from Massimo. Are you using a pre-existing database of notes, or is this started from scratch? Yeah, I'm just improvising now, so it's really from scratch because I wanted to show you how I would actually do this. And yeah, this is why maybe the rhythm is a little bit slower than it could be, but then it's also more realistic and honest this way. So we have all these notes here. I could add more, but let's say I want to get some external inspiration. So this is one of the greatest features of InfraNodus, is that actually, as you're writing, you can also go outside and add another graph to this graph to see what you're missing. So for example, I can select which concepts I'm interested in. In this case, it's going to be physical practice. Then I'm going to press on this button, import from Google. I can also use other sources. If I press plus, there are more sources available, but I like to first go into Google. And what's going to happen now is that I'm going to say, okay, visualize me a graph that will be the search results for this search term, physical practice, in English, and you say, okay. And also here is important thing that it's saving it into a comparison graph. If I switch this off, it's just going to add the search results into the notes. But I don't want to mix my notes with Google search results, so this is why automatically it's saving into a comparison graph. I can also choose here some more graphs. This is a new feature. You could also save it somewhere else. But here I'm actually keeping all the default settings that it's proposing to me, and I'm saving it into comparison graph. I click import, and what happens here is that InfraNodus, it will import top 40 search results from Google on this query and visualize them to me as a graph, so I can see what is the general discourse that is available on the topic of physical practice on Google at the moment. You know, what people are actually writing about. And here you see the two nodes are selected, so it makes sense to actually remove them from the graph. This is another great feature of InfraNodus. You cannot actually do this so easily in other tools, but here you can just get rid of the stuff that seemed too obvious, and then you see the context around them, and this is really useful. And here we see the sort of semantic field around the concept of physical practice. So we see that there is a lot about health and exercise, and we also have something about mental training. So this is interesting for me because I wanted to think about the connection between the body and the mind. So I'm going to click on mental training, and then it shows me the Google search results that have these two concepts inside. And imagine this is really different from when you search Google, because in Google, as you know, most of the people, they only click on the top two search results. Here, I can see the whole field, the whole context around a certain search query, so I don't have to focus on what is most popular, but rather on what is more relevant or more interesting for me, in this case, mental training. Okay, so I have these options here that it's talking about comparing the effects of physical practice and mental imagery. I can read a little bit the extracts from each page, and I can see that, okay, so there is something about the connection between imagery training and mental representation. Let's see more. Method of training, learning, mental imagery rehearsal. So this is interesting. Okay, I will add this as a note. So I can actually add this here and say that mental imagery is used for training, and it might have some interesting use in physical practice training as well. So just to remember this idea and to think that somehow it's relevant. And look what happens here. When I add these ideas into the graph, they will be highlighted in blue. And that means that I covered these parts of the existing discourse with my own ideas. As you can see here, I covered mental training, and I still have therapy, I still have health, exercise benefit left. So I can also select those nodes. So let's see, what about health benefits? And of course, there's a lot of search results on health benefits of physical practice. So I can write like, okay, physical practices have health benefits, and let's say physical practices and exercise have health benefits, and can also positively affect one's mental state. Okay, add this into the graph. As I'm exploring this topic, my original intention was to create some kind of set of notes that would allow me to then write an article about this, maybe also see if there is an interesting area of this topic where I could contribute in an interesting way with some research. And also because I have another project which is based on the connection between the body and the mind, I want to understand a little bit what the discourse in this field is and see if somehow I could also change the way I'm talking about my other project, which is connected to physical practice, somehow touching upon all the different topics that are also relevant to the people who are interested in the subject. So it somehow can be useful both for writing and for marketing, and just to kind of improve your general understanding of a certain field. Okay, so we go on here and we look at the therapy. So you see already mental and health and exercise and spiritual and training is already covered here in the graph. And this is the only cluster that's left uncovered. As soon as I cover this, I will somehow cover with my notes the general discourse that exists out there around the concept of physical practice. And what's cool is that if I'm not ready to write something, I can just click on those two nodes. And as you can see, they're added as hashtags here. They will be added into the graph, so I can later use this as a note to add some ideas. I have this here. You see they are highlighted. So I already see that, okay, there's almost everything that is in the graph was added. If I want, I can also remove the most influential elements by pressing this button, Reveal Non-Obvious. It's called like this because it removes the stuff that are most obvious, like exercise, mental health, improve. Of course, we'll talk about this when we talk about physical practice. We remove this, and then we see what's hiding behind all those topics. And here I see one more regular activity. So benefits of regular physical activity. So physical activity has benefits when it is regular. Okay, I can write just like any practice, a note to self. Okay, add this into the graph. It's highlighted with the blue. And also something about depression. This reminds me that physical practice can be very useful to fight mental illness and depression. Later I can find a scientific reference to that, but for now I'm just adding this as an idea so I don't forget. Also can zoom into this cluster and see what it's about, some conference, okay, I'm not interested in it, and so on. So this would be how I would use Google for external inspiration and add some ideas into the graph. Then I click on result, because this is what I was doing. I was interpreting, and now I'm on the original page. And these are all the concepts I added, okay? As you can see now, they're quite disconnected from each other. So what InfraNodus does is that it recommends me here in this field to make connections between these ideas. If I click on the analytics panel on the right and go into the insight panel, it's going to tell me the same, that I should ask a research question that would link those two topics together. So if I click on generate questions, I can generate something with OpenAI GPT-3, which in this case really acts as an intelligent conversational partner who is asking me questions that will help me think. Unlike other tools that attempt to write for it for you, which is actually not so useful because it's kind of coming up with really banal and uninteresting stuff. This is why they only use it for marketing copies at the moment. But if you want a thinking tool, I think that asking AI to pose questions is much more interesting than asking it to write answers for you at this point. So let me see what the questions are in the chat right now. Maybe I can answer some of them. Okay, so Mark is asking, are the GPT-3 questions generated on the fly as you input into the editor? Yes, actually, they're generated based on the structure of the discourse. And what happens here technically is that InfraNodus identifies a structural gap. So it finds two topics or two clusters of nodes which are not connected. And that could be connected to make my discourse more coherent and more connected. And then it makes a prompt or a question for the GPT-3 that would ask it to make a connection between those two topics. And this is why when you generate a question, it looks into these two clusters, as you can see here, the yellow-orange one and the pink one. And then it forms a question that would link, the answer to which would link those two topics together. This is why it's always highly relevant and really stimulating somehow. So this is how it works. And if you don't like what it generated, you can always click regenerate, and then it's going to generate more. So here, as you can see, it's talking about build skill and intellectual ability through imagery. Okay, this is interesting. It's connected imagery here, this node, and intellectual skill. So it's proposing me to think, okay, what is the connection? So I can say that visualizations can be very useful for building memory and also intellectual and cognitive abilities. Okay, add this into the graph. And I can also write something that imagery training could be used as a form of visualization. Make the connection. As you can see now, visualization becomes an important node that connects to other nodes. And we don't see the names of the other smaller nodes, and this is because they're less relevant. So what we do here is that we choose to show the colors of the labels and size and show all the names actually. And like this, we can see a little bit better, you know, what those names are. Okay, right now, I think it doesn't show it because we need to go to all statements. Yes, then they will be shown again. Okay, so this is how it would work gathering information, writing your own ideas, coming up with some thoughts. If I had some excerpts or my own notes from PDF documents, I could also import them. So for example, one way that people normally like to use is that if you use a tool like Zotero, which is like a scientific paper management tool. Let me open it to see if I can show it to you. Okay. Zotero. Okay, in the meanwhile, while it's opening, I'm going to answer more questions. So Abdullah is asking, what's the list of stop words that you're using here? I see, for example, the is are ignored. Yes, there is a default list of stop words, which you can change here in the settings. If you go to the settings and you go to stop words, you can actually click on the English list of stop words, and then it's going to open you the list of the stop words used. If you want, you can add your own stop words, or if you wanted to exclude some of them, you would write them with minus. So I could say that, okay, actually I always want to appear, but the word mind, I also want to be added into stop words. I don't want it to be visualized. So I could add it like this using a comma. This is how you would control this behavior. Okay, another question from Jackie. Want to know a customer story of how to benefit from these tools and like that further. So you're asking about a customer story, how to benefit from these tools and any tools like that. Well, I can give you a story of one customer. So if you really talk about customers and like benefit, for me, one main benefit is that it allows you to think in a different way or to look at information from a different perspective, to think more creatively. So every user who actually likes InfraNodus, they like it for that reason, that it allows you to, have a different perspective on the information that you have. Even if you have your own text, you can just copy and paste it inside, visualize it as a network, look at the graph, it will already give you a different perspective. You will have a good overview here of the main topics inside, which might give you a better idea of what you could add to this discourse. You also have the inside panel where you can see how you could make more connections in a different way and so on. So this benefit for me is the main one, but of course there are also commercial applications. For example, with one of the customers, we worked on something where they would import the user reviews for their product, and then see what people are actually talking about. There's sentiment analysis here, so you can see like, okay, what are the positive statements about my product? And if you click here, you will see the graph only for the positive statements, and then you see what the customers are talking about when they talk positively about something that you do. And if you click on the negative, you will see, okay, what they talk about negative stuff. And you see here it's about illness, fight depression, and so on. So this would be somehow like a use case that you could also apply in a corporate context, and then it has a really clear monetary benefit for you because you understand your customers better. If you then study your competition, then you will be able to see what they're better in than you and so on. So this would be another customer story that you could benefit from. When we talk about personal knowledge management, well, I mean, writing articles is great with this tool because this is how I usually actually go about doing this. I will add some notes inside the graph. It's very easy to start writing, so you never have writer's block because you're always stimulated with the graph and with the ideas from the OpenAI or with the external sources like I showed here from Google. And then you make a few notes, and then because you see it as a graph, you start connecting them together. So now I see that, for example, there is no connection between memory and mind and body, so I could add something that is more about that. I could also say something about martial arts and how regular activity has health benefits, and then I could say that actually martial arts also have these health benefits, and it just helps me build a coherent discourse, which I can then later convert into an article. So this is another real benefit. The continuation of this question reads further, could this graph be as input of any machine learning? Human user can read this graph, but how can this be integrated into a larger automation solution? Well, there are many ways that you could integrate it. You could use it for feature engineering if you have some data sets that you want to work with and you want to extract some meaningful information from them. And of course, you could also observe what are the best strategies to use the graph when you come up with really interesting results, and then modify a natural language generation artificial intelligence system to actually use the same strategies. So this could be two very clear benefits. Timo is saying improvement question, Scholar Google as a comparison graph option. Yes, I know. And actually Scholar doesn't allow this kind of access. But I found one API that somehow offers it, and I'm going to add it soon into the system. So I don't know if it's going to be completely like in the rules of Google to do that, but as we're not accessing this information directly, maybe it's okay. We're doing it through another API, so I hope they have a legal agreement with them. But now what you can do is to import the scientific papers from other sources like PubMed, Core UK, and PLOS, which is usually a collection of the papers on different medical subjects and so on. You can also integrate them here. So for example, if I'm talking about physical practice, so I will add all the deleted nodes into the graph. So it's a little bit more connected now. Reload it. Sometimes you have to reload the graph. Unfortunately, occasionally it bugs. This button is really useful. We're working on it, but if you see some strange behavior, just click that. It's going to reset everything. There's also the button here, reset the graph. Okay, so then I will be like, okay, physical practice. I want to see what is written on physical practice in scientific papers. So I click here, and then I have a few import options. I'm going to choose scientific publications here, add this topic, physical practice. Okay, and I will say that I want it from PLOS. It's my favorite source, actually. And then it will save it into the comparison graph. So I don't import it into my text that I'm writing, but rather in that graph that already has Google search results inside. So it's going to combine it with the Google search results. If I wanted to, I could also delete all the results from this additional graph and then add the scientific ones separately. But I like to somehow, add it all together. And here we have the visualization, which is really detailed. I will delete physical practice again so they don't overtake the whole graph. And then I can delete a few more nodes. So for example, activity, maybe it's not so interesting for me. Delete that. Okay, so here I see that it's used a lot in childcare. So when we talk about physical practice in science, they actually use this topic a lot in childcare. So I will add it into my research as a note, just as a note to self to make a research about this later. I think this will be important to do. Okay, we added this, and now it's going to be visualized, highlighted with blue here on the graph. I can also say that, okay, I'm interested in experimental group setup, or let's say something about patients, and maybe I can see here which other relevant words are connected to the word patient. So for example, safety, patient safety, and physical practice are also quite important. So I will add this as a graph, and actually I can even write like this, physical practice. Use a wiki link to make a connection. So this is how I would get inspiration from the outside sources. Now, another thing, so I will now go back to the original graph with these new ideas, add all the nodes into the graph. What's also nice is that you see at this point, I didn't have to use any wiki links. In the other tools like Obsidian, I hope you can see it on the screen now. Obsidian, it builds a graph automatically based on what you add, but the connections that it makes are based on the wiki link. So for example, if I have a text here, and then let's say I want to select, okay, let's go for this document here, fractal scale free network. So this is a paper that I found, and I had to manually select all these concepts so that they would be linked to this node. And this is a problem because sometimes I don't select everything, then I have to come back to the document, make the unlinked mentions linked again. So it's somehow slightly cumbersome. Here, I'm actually adding the concepts, and as I have the graph ready, at some point I can be like, okay, so let's say that the physical practice is something that I want to treat as one node. So I'm going to link it, add it like this, it's going to be one node. And then when I later export this stuff, then it will be exported as a topic for all the statements which talk about physical practice. So for example, let me just demonstrate to you quickly. Of course, I would normally work with the bigger graph, but let's start with this one. Mental training, I select these nodes, add them as a single node again. And then let's say another topic I want to also say is that cognitive, intellectual. So let's say, let's name it cognitive skills, or something like that. Okay. And maybe also exercise benefits. Okay. Benefits. Add this. Here are all the nodes I added, and they're also shown here as the topics for this graph. If I want, I can also save this. So we'll save it with concepts. Save this as a version so that next time when I want to use this, it's available here with all the selections that I did, and I also have an original graph as well. And then I can export this graph as the blocks with topics, and what's going to happen here is that it will mark each of those statements with the topics that are selected here. So just like, look, if I select, let's say, this physical practice, mental training, let's say, then I have all the statements that have, okay, now I'm going to select mental training. I have all the statements that are marked as the ones that belong to the idea of mental training. Then if I select mind, then I have all the topics that have this topic. So when I export it later as blocks with topics, it's going to be saved as a text file, which will then, if I put it inside Obsidian, so this is another part of the workflow that you could use. You just make a new node, and then you add this into Obsidian, and you already have each block marked with the concepts that you were talking about automatically using the topic modeling system, which is available inside InfraNodus. So this can be quite useful if you want to start writing about something, but you don't yet know what you want to highlight, and you want to learn about it as you go. This could be one workflow that you do. You know, you add some things in, make the connections, name the topics, and then export it here as blocks with topics, and you will have them marked exactly like the topical groups are marked here. Let me look at more questions. So how did you use Google's search against your text writing? Well, so basically, just like I showed, you know, I wrote a few concepts in, then I clicked here, I imported the graph, which was then available here as the additional graph. I looked into the graph to see what's missing, and then I added some of the missing concepts inside my original graph. And it just helped me cover more topics than I had originally. Massimo is saying, I'm eager to see integration with Obsidian and exporting your nodes to other platforms. So I think I just showed this, but I'm going to show a little bit more. And Timo already answered that it's possible to import from Obsidian already now. Yes, that's right. Thank you, Timo. Will the open source version of InfraNodus be up to the feature of the paid version? So actually, it has all the features, but not completely. So you could actually do all those things with open source version. But for example, importing stuff, I think, is a bit more difficult. And also this topical expert with the topics, I don't think it's still there. Basically, we have to focus on this product because more people are using it, and also because we can sustain ourselves with that. And this is why the priority now goes to this tool. But of course, the open source is still there, and we really believe in open source as well. And you can have all the basic features of the tool there as well. So for the workflow I showed, it has this basic functionality of adding ideas inside and visualizing them as a graph, but not the expert ones. Okay, so Massimo is saying, I'm on Google Chrome and trying to navigate Nodus Labs, but I can't go past the first page, huge black overlay. Yes, some problem with the website. I know about this, and we're working on this. I have to say that it was because of some kind of WordPress bug, and it has to be fixed, but it's going to be fixed. When you merge two nodes, all links from the both are also merged. Yes, so basically when you merge two nodes, everything that they were both linked to is linked now to this main node that is merged. Timo is saying, from that example, a good practice would be to use InfraNodus to work on a topic, but once processed, save it on Obsidian or another tool to be added to the rest of your knowledge. Yes, if you prefer to use Obsidian as the database for your knowledge, exactly like you said, you use InfraNodus to start writing about something, and then you export all this data and save it as a separate page into your Obsidian vault. And then you can, make the connections with what you already have. Maybe this is a good point to show also how you could work the other way around. So not only to use InfraNodus to start writing something, but to also make sense of your Obsidian stuff. And this is an important part of this webinar, actually, because what I noticed myself while working with Obsidian, because I wanted to try it out, actually, I usually use InfraNodus for the whole cycle of my knowledge management, but I thought, okay, I'll give it a try to also understand how it works. Actually, I tried all of these tools. I think my favorite one is Obsidian at the moment. But the problem here is that I have a text which I was writing about. I think it's this one. I will try to select it here. So I don't really understand how to select it, the narrative node. Okay, maybe it's just shown. Yeah, it's showing me what the narrative is connected to here. Okay, so then I have all these different concepts that I was interested in. So for instance, let's say small world is one of the nodes, and it's shown here yellow on the graph, right? So then I somehow have my graph here. I can click on the different topics of this research, which was about fractal dynamics, and I can see in which context I was using all those nodes. The main problem I have with this graph of Obsidian is that I cannot really understand what I should do with that, because, okay, I see the main nodes. Obviously, these are the papers which I imported, which had some interesting concepts. I see that the concept of scale-free is quite important here, and epidemic threshold also, and so on. So this is a local graph, Massimo, I'm looking at. Then I see, the scale-free fractal dimensions and so on. So I see this, and of course, yes, I can also open the actual graph of the page. You mean here? Open local graph. So it shows the graph of the narrative. But again, even if I have this view, I see everything it's connected to. But then let's say I go here. It's very nice. I can see how things are connected, but I don't really understand how I can convert it into something that could be useful to actually develop this discourse further. If you have any idea, you can always let me know. I would be really curious how you actually use this tool. But what I found was really useful is that I was like, okay, so let's do it this way. We take all the information inside from Obsidian, and we import it into InfraNodus to see how things are connected there. Because what the advantage is inside InfraNodus is that it doesn't just show you the graph, but it also tells you what you could do with this graph. So you can really see what are the new connections that you can make, what are the topics that somehow belong to the same cluster, how they relate together. And then it's very easy to then use the graph to generate more ideas. So what I did is that as I store it already locally, okay, so I go inside InfraNodus, then I go into the Obsidian import app here, and then I say, okay, choose the files, and I'm going to go inside my Obsidian vault, which I store in my iCloud. I'll go into research, fractals and networks, narrative. I think I actually maybe saved it. Okay, so let's go into all the concepts that I saved. I select all the concepts to see how all the concepts that relate to this research connect. And here I have two options. I will just leave the default one. save it into this new graph. What it does now is that it automatically imports all the statements from all those nodes. I will reload it so it's a little bit more up to date. And your actual pages are shown as this kind of square nodes, and the words that you use are shown as the normal nodes. And this is the difference from Obsidian, because in Obsidian, I just see the connections between the pages. And this view, you also have it here. So if I want to see the Obsidian view, I could say, only show me mentions wikilinks. It's in the filter panel here. Not so many people know about this feature, but it exists. And here I see all the connections between my nodes. But what's cool is that I can also see where the connections are lacking. So I can really clearly see that the ideas around scale-free are developed, but around fractal dimension, small world are not so developed. And maybe it would make sense to start making those connections. So this is what InfraNodus is telling me, that think of the connection between small world fractal dimension topology and scale-free, and then it has some two nodes because they were references, but it doesn't matter so much. I can generate new research questions. And then what are the effects of fractal dimension on the topology of the network? So this is a really relevant question to me, because it talks about fractal dimension, which is here, and it talks about network structure, which is here. And it makes me think of a possible connection between the two. So I can even use the same way of writing, and I can say that fractal dimension is one of the parameters we can use to better understand the network structure we're dealing with. I can use like this, or I can also use at signs if I'm, wanting to keep the same structure as I have here. Save it into the graph, and then make a new connection between these two topics together. So this is how it would work, that you kind of use it to generate new ideas. What you can also do is that you go and you switch off the view where you see the connections between the pages, and rather you see all the words that you use inside those pages. And maybe that will give you some interesting ideas. So for example, here, I see that I'm writing a lot about network properties in my text, and I'm writing a lot about weight, distance, and so on. I also talk about time scaling. So this gives me a really nice understanding of what are the actual concepts that I'm using that I didn't yet mark as wiki links in my text, and how they could be connected. And I can, of course, also generate some research questions based on that. So let's go a little bit further and delete some of the nodes from the graph. So for example, weight network, let's get rid of this, and then see if there is some interesting recommendations here. Okay, so for example, network property system, time-wide valuable. And I can generate a research question that will link those two concepts together. So this could be another way how you could connect those ideas that you have inside Obsidian, but in a new way, in a way that you wouldn't be able to see with Obsidian itself. Just a different perspective on the content you have. Okay, so now what I wanted to do was to check the other poll in the meanwhile. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. So we have the second poll here that I'm going to launch now, which is about what kind of data sources you like to have when you're working with any tools and with InfraNodus as well. So if you could please answer that, because this would help me understand what features we need to build into the tool, what kind of external sources you like to have when you're managing your knowledge. Okay, so people like to use scientific papers. Maybe this is a good moment to show how I normally use Zotero. Somehow it just doesn't open on my computer. So let's see if I can show it here. No. Okay, so Zotero doesn't seem to work. But I can explain to you what I wanted to do with Zotero. So basically, it's a tool that allows me to manage research papers. And what's good about Zotero is that I can save all the papers into one folder. Then I can make annotations to each paper. And then I can use an extension in Zotero, which is called Zotfile. So I'll write it in the chat, Zotero, Zotfile, which then extracts annotations as text. And then I can copy and paste this text into InfraNodus, and I can visualize all the annotations I had in my PDFs, but inside this tool. And then I can, again, have a good overview of what those connections are, and also how I could make some new connections that would not be available to me before. So this would be a nice way to integrate external knowledge into the graph and get some inspiration from it. Another question from, or it's a comment rather. Timo Schuler. Recently, Andrew Kirby, a YouTuber, put together a huge Obsidian vault gathering most of Naval Ravikant's accessible knowledge. I intend to use InfraNodus one day to explore it, but at the moment I'm busy with other projects. If that sparks an interest, everything is explained through this YouTube video. Thank you, Timo. I'm going to check this and see, maybe we can even do something with this tool ourselves and visualize it if it's public. I guess it's going to be possible to do so. Okay, get back into the chat. I will read more questions now. So show what you do with the graph, interesting direction. Okay, Bruno, I'm going to do that. So, I mean, I already showed to you that, for example, what I like to do with the graph is that I like to look at the gaps in my knowledge. So for example, I will really work visually. I have these two really nice areas here, one about time, one about characteristic processes, and I will try to make a connection between them. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to even make it a little bit more visible, all the labels, show the labels of the graph so I can see what they're talking about. And then I'm going to click on some nodes to understand the context. So for example, variation and nature. So when investigating nature, we often discard the observed variation, describe the properties in terms of averages. Okay, so this is interesting. This is a paper which talks about the fact that you don't have to omit the fact that nature is non-stationary by default. So there is no average values, but it has power law distributions often, and this is why somehow it's important to, I just clicked something and it disappeared. Okay, so this is why it's important to actually, look at all the different ways of measuring this information. And then I have also another thing here, which is talking about, let's say, critical success. Okay, critical role in the success. So it's about the trended fluctuation analysis as a tool that could be used to actually measure variability. So I could then add that some tools like the trended fluctuation analysis can be used to measure variation in nature. And also to add this to the original stuff that I would say, so I can say can be, say, critical for measuring. So I can make a connection between these two nodes, add this into the graph. And then as you can see, I connected these two islands together with some new idea. Then I would look into another gap. So I would maybe look into the neuroscientist community. And here it's talking about how this method of the trended fluctuation analysis could be used in neuroscience. Okay, this is interesting. And then I click on something here. Maybe, let's say, what can be inspiring here? Physiological processes. Physiological processes exhibit fluctuations that can have scale-free dynamics. So actually, neuroscience is physiological. So I can say that the trended fluctuation analysis can be used to measure physiological fluctuations, already selecting the nodes automatically. And also in neurosciences by neuroscientists. I'm kind of changing the phrases here so I can make the connections between all those different nodes. But of course, later when I rewrite it, I would then change the way that they work and maybe use the word neuroscience here. So this is how I would work with the graph. Just look into some clusters, make the connections between them, move on, and so on. So for example, here I see some interesting measure, Hausdorff measure, which is measuring fractality. And maybe I could connect it again to my idea of the trended fluctuation analysis. So then I can also add another connection. I would write that the trended fluctuation analysis and Hausdorff measure. Okay, great. Make this connection also, and so on. So this is how I would go with the graph, just making connections between all those disconnected subjects. And then I go back to the filter and ask the system to show me all the connections again. So again, I see all my actual pages connected and also all the nodes. By the way, here you have them marked with the @ signs. So this is because we chose in the import section of Obsidian to mark them this way. If you want, you can also import them in a different way, and this will give you a slightly different perspective on this discourse. So if I go import Obsidian and I go back, select all the concepts, and then I say visualize wikilinks, but without the sign. And what happens here is that it's going to use a slightly different logic. It will instead save them as part of the discourse, and it will connect them slightly differently. So I will see not the connections between the pages, but rather the concepts that I use, including the concepts that are wikilinks, but also the concepts that I didn't mark as wikilinks. And this is another great perspective because, as you can see here, I can really clearly notice what are the main topics and what are the clusters. So I see that I'm talking a lot about scale-free. There's a cluster about Hausdorff dimension, epidemic threshold, fractal dimension network. So I really quickly see what my discourse is about. And this is really great. I can then, expand on this a little bit further. Here I see that it's another cluster about DFA, or the trended fluctuation analysis. I can actually unify those nodes and just call it fluctuation analysis here. And then it's going to be added as a separate node and so on. So basically, it's quite small because it's not connected to so many of the influential nodes, but this is how it would normally work, and then I can move on and kind of, explore what are the different topics in this discourse and how I could connect them exactly in the same way, opening the insight panel here and looking into the different structural gaps. So for example, here are the two clusters that are only connected with the idea of scale-free. One is it's an epidemic threshold cluster. Another one is about DFA and the analysis that it can do. So I could say that, okay, actually this method of fluctuation analysis could be really useful for identifying epidemic threshold, or maybe ask myself, would that be really useful or not? So this is how I would go with the graph and move along. I could also use the AI to generate the research questions here. Right now I'm going to end the poll and share the results just to see what people actually answered when they talked about the sources that they like to use. So as you can see, most people like to browse the web and just get some ideas from the web. And in this case, of course, you can just copy and paste and add them into the graph here. So this is a really good way to do that. Then you can also read scientific papers, save annotations, and then import them through Zotero or any other tools that you like. And then we have Google Scholar, Google Search, and just talking to people. Great. And then one last poll that I would like to share is what personal knowledge management system you actually prefer, just for me to know what your preferences are. In the meanwhile, let's say Timo is saying, beyond search engines, I sincerely gather most of my new ideas and knowledge about topics from long-form podcast conversation. And this is great. Yes. So in fact, we had a feature before where you could import any YouTube video that has subtitles. So you could do that, and this was really great because then you could just have a visualization of what they talk about in the YouTube video. This is because they had the subtitles attached. And I think I want to bring this feature back in because, as you say, there's a lot of content out there. If there are transcripts of podcasts, then of course you could import it there. If there are YouTube videos, then this could be done as well. And I think also that this is a great source of information as well. In the meanwhile, if you could answer the poll, this would be really great to know what is your preferred knowledge management system, just to see what you normally like to use. And we will soon wrap this webinar. If you want me to talk about something else, please let me know in the chat or in the Q&A section. Maybe showing some of the features that are not clear to you, or how to import your notes in different way. In the meanwhile, just to make you entertained, I'm going to show another import option from Obsidian, which is using just the wiki link. So basically, if you just want to recreate the graph that you have in Obsidian, you choose the third option here, visualize wiki links, and then it will just visualize the links in between the pages only. So you will see the original graph. When you see something like this, by the way, that not everything is selected, it's because you are on the inside panel. If you click on all statements, then it's going to show you all the statements. So this is how it works, just as a little hack. And here it shows you the connections between all the pages you have inside Obsidian. And again, really nice because if it's a big graph, you can use the insights from network analysis to see what are the main topics. In the insight panel, which two topics you could connect. So for example, applying this method of measuring fluctuations and the trended fluctuation analysis to social networks. This could be interesting. This, I think it hasn't been done so much before. Actually, what's cool is that I can select those two nodes, CTFA social networks, and then you have a little button here, which I don't know if many people know about this, but it will search on Google whatever it is that you selected. So if you click here in the editor on the left, it will visualize the Google graph for this topic. Here it will just search on Google for that. So if you just want to check first what exists out there. Okay, so we see that, for instance, here it's not really understanding that what we talk about is actually the trended fluctuation analysis. So what we could do is to import Google search results. Let's say the trended fluctuation analysis of social networks. So make it really specific. Save it into comparison graph so we can see what exists out there on the discourse without messing up with our original Obsidian graph. And then get some inspiration. Something that you cannot easily do in Obsidian, but you can do that in InfraNodus. So you see that, okay, I see that it's about analysis and the trended analysis. Social network, multifractal. So this is interesting because multifractal social network. Let's see. I select those terms and then I see that effects of fractal interpolation, fractal filter. So I find a paper that might be interesting for me that talks about a certain method of analyzing social networks. Oh no, this is actually like an approach. Do they talk about social networks? Not so much. So then I can click on another one above. And here it talks about the trended fluctuation analysis and analysis of social systems. So this is what I need. And this is how I find this paper that could be interesting for me. And let's say what you could also do, if you feel lazy, you could just import the abstract here as a note and then have it visualized. Or what you could also do is to make a separate graph, which is actually better, excerpts. And you just read all the relevant excerpts about the topic of your interest into the graph, and then you visualize it. And then what you can do is that you can compare it with the one that you're writing about. So for example, here I want to see the intersection of this and of my notes, but the original one where I had, I think here I had all of them. Yeah, exactly, was the second one. So I press Shift and I select this graph, and then I can see them both at the same time. If I just want to see the difference, I will go back, reload the graph, and then press this button, and without pressing the Shift, I'm choosing the second graph, the one where I was writing about this topic, and then I see where they intersect and also how they're different. So what is in excerpts, so in what I just actually copied and pasted from the research paper, but not in my notes. Actually nothing. Okay, this is nice. I see that it talks about multifractality, point analysis, and so on. So then I can focus a little bit more on these topics in my research, actually. Another way how I could show it in a more visible way is if I go to excerpts and then I use this one. So it shows the actual differences between the graph, the second button here, go back here again. And then it visualizes to me the difference, what is in excerpts, but not in my notes, but in a more visually appealing way. And here I can identify some interesting topics that I could add into my original study. So for example, here it's talking about analysis of the phase transition systems, visibility. I could take some ideas or even just, use some hashtags and add them into my original graph this way. And then when I come back to it, I'm going to have this idea shown here, and I can later export all the stuff that I added back into Obsidian and continue exploring the topic. So let's wrap up this webinar. I'm going to share the search results. I like it. Obsidian is on the same page, is on the same level of use as InfraNodus, which is great. Not so many answers, but that's fine. And let's go on to the last questions in the chat. So thank you, Massimo, for your feedback. Abdullah is asking what's the maximum number of nodes that the graph can handle. So it can actually handle a lot of nodes, but if you want it to work very quickly and for it to be kind of easy to use, it's not more than 150 is our recommendation and the default setting. But if you click here, you can extend the number of nodes shown. So here you see you have 150 by default. You could also put 1,000, but then the graph will be quite overloaded. So if you want to get some meaningful insight from the graph, I would recommend to keep it small. And if you have an Obsidian vault with many documents, I would rather recommend to import folders, the folders separately, and then to have a few graphs for each folder, and then you could connect those graphs. If you do something like this, like you have one graph here, then let's say that you want to link it to this graph, then you would press Shift and choose this other graph, and they will be both shown. But the advantage of this is that you really see the most relevant concepts rather than seeing everything at once and not really being able to choose what you should focus on, because the bigger is the graph, the more is the number of the connections it has, so it becomes a bit difficult. But you could expand this. So Chengdai is saying, do you have a link where we can access these recorded videos? I'm sorry to take you back. I didn't see the bring connect isolated notes. So to bring connect isolated notes, I don't quite understand what you mean. But I will publish this video. It will be in the webinars. I'm going to, actually it's being streamed now. There's the number of the connections. So I'm going to send you the link right now to the video, and it's going to stay there. It's being streamed on YouTube, and you can watch it after. Okay, so let me see more questions. Thank you, Timo, for your feedback also. Yeah, if you like to use InfraNodus for this use case, we'll be really happy to hear your feedback. Of course, it can be improved in many ways. It's still in the very beginning, but it's already quite useful. And if you are ready to, sometimes deal with an occasional hiccup or some UX imperfection, just let us know what you encounter on your way, what doesn't work for you, and we'll fix it. So we're really looking forward to it actually being used, so we know from you guys what we could make better and how we could make it more fluid and fluent the process. Okay. Thank you, Cheng Tai. You're saying that the supervisor that you have recommends it to all the students. This is really nice of the supervisor. So Bojidar is saying it is still difficult for me to imagine using InfraNodus for my main personal management system. What are your plans for the future? Also, generate questions function is a game changer. Thank you for working so hard on this project. It is amazing. Thank you, Bojidar. It's true that if you want to use it as your main personal knowledge management, there are some drawbacks. Like, for instance, we still don't have folders in the menu for all those ideas that you have. So you actually cannot put separate graphs into folders here. You have each graph shown in the root of the menu. So this might be inconvenient for some people. There is also like a global graph view, but the global search function is not yet working. So if you need those features, then yes, you would probably better be off using Obsidian or Remnode or Roam Research or just Google Docs or whatever other system you like to use. But what InfraNodus is really helpful for is when you want to start writing new ideas. I think this is what it's working really well for already. If you just want to start exploring a certain idea and you want to write down a few thoughts, then you can export them and put it into your knowledge management system. So it becomes part of the process rather than the main tool. And what it's also great for is what I showed before, that if you have an already existing graph that you made with one of those tools like Obsidian, that you could actually import it inside InfraNodus and just use it to take a different perspective on this material using the features that do not yet exist in Obsidian. And using the intelligence of the network science and all these parameters here to get some interesting insights about what you're thinking about actually and how you could connect it in a different way. And of course, also this OpenAI GPT-3 function, which you have here at the bottom. So this can be also really useful. And then once you have those ideas, you add them into the text, and then you export them back and add them into the graph. So this could be a really efficient way of using it. By the way, one way that, if you want to not mess with your original graph, what you could do here is actually use the interpret feature. So if you have a graph and then you want to start writing on top of it, what you can do, I will actually show it on this one here. Yeah, just click on the interpret one, and then you will be creating a separate graph which will be called meta. So you could say like, okay, fractal dimension of a network will show, will provide some insights about its structure. And you can actually put this into square brackets so you keep the semantics of Obsidian, the one that you use in Obsidian, and maybe network also. Okay, super. And then you save it into the graph. And you see it's highlighted in gray here, so you know that you covered this part of the original graph. So then you could be also like epidemic threshold can be estimated using the scale-free measure. So I'm making new connections inside this graph, adding them inside. And then I have a separate graph, which will be shown here. So next time I load it, look here, you have the meta graph. And this is actually all the nodes I made on top of my existing Obsidian graph. And if I covered the existing discourse, it's going to be highlighted with gray. So this is how I will also know if I covered enough ideas. What you also cannot do in Obsidian, but what you can do in InfraNodus is that you can select the nodes, delete them from the graph, and then see what's hiding behind them very easily. So I could also say that, for instance, here it's talking about average and means and how they're not really usable for networks because they have another kind of metrics. So average and mean are not usable for network analysis as they are power. Okay, add this inside, cover a bit more subjects, make new connection, make those two clusters closer to each other. So this can be pretty useful, and then you export them here with the topics and add them into your graph. You can also export them without the topics, so just the plain text, just like you see them here. And then I will open them in a text editor. Let me show you here. It's here. Go to Obsidian, add them here, and here's how I expanded on my existing discourse using InfraNodus. So this is how I would normally go about combining all those elements together. Okay, Bojidra, there are so many functions that is mind-blowing. Have you ever thought of step-by-step tutorial? Seen 80% of videos, and it's difficult to apply 20%. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I don't know about Bojidra if you've seen our support portal. There are step-by-step tutorials that are in the form of text and articles, so maybe this could be interesting for you. If you go to how to use InfraNodus here, now it's going to show my tickets. I have to log in like this. Okay, so here you have how to use InfraNodus, and you have a few sections. So for example, if you go to from actually 1 to 4, you will be able to see how to start using InfraNodus, then how to find the structural niche, how to develop an idea, then some more advanced features here, presenting your ideas. And then you also have case studies here, which you can also use to come up just with some interesting use cases as well. And many of them, they don't only have the videos at the top. So this one just has the video. Okay, let's look at this one here. It has a step-by-step instructions. So this could be also pretty useful if you want to try it out. Okay, well, so I think here is where we will stop this webinar. Thank you very much for joining and for being with me for this almost 1 hour and a half. If you have any questions, please let me know. This is the email, dimitri@noduslabs.com. And the next webinar will take place in about 2-3 weeks. The link is already there, just above in the chat to the support portal. This is the link to the Twitter, Nodus Labs. And we also have an Instagram account, which is like that. Thank you, everyone, for your attention and for your time. Remember, if you have any questions, please let me ask. Yes, the link to the videos. Well, I sent the link earlier, but to this video, the link is here. Again, I will send it again. Thank you very much for joining. Also, if you click on this video, then you will subscribe to our YouTube channel. There are more videos there and the tutorials as well. And the support portal, which I sent, has also all the information that you might need. If something is missing, please let me know by email and we will add a specific workflow. But all these things that I was just talking about, there is not so much materials about it yet, but there will be added in the form of the help articles. So there are already the videos, but I'm going to add some of the information about how you can actually do all this step by step in the form of text because it's easier for some people. Thank you very much, and till the next time.